since we're not on a time limit, can we like? No, I can get one of these, but since we're not on a time limit, can we like not feel as rushed as we were earlier? Okay, awesome. We will take our time.
Thank
Not long,
you.
but yeah. See you in 2 hours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thank you, first of all, to Bettina and the whole ETC team for organizing this amazing event and accommodating us despite our technical troubles to give this talk. So we're going to talk to you about the need for indestructible communication. So internet is a communication and information technology, right? But it's not currently, as we know it, indestructible. However, does not mean that it will always stay the same. And we, together, Jarrell and I, with the Internet Defense Alliance, are going to work towards a better internet and more reliable one. So before we cut to the chase, I just want to quickly ask the audience, has any one of you ever been disrupted in your connection to internet by a governmentally imposed shutdown?
Nice. Got some hands.
Yes, but very few. So whose life next has been indirectly touched or disrupted by internet shutdowns somewhere else?
Your family, your friends.
Your business, somehow working with people in jurisdiction where there were shutdowns. More hands. Obviously, this audience is not necessarily the ones targeted by shutdowns usually, although we're going to see later that it can touch every one of us. But last question, who thinks that network states, since network state is a hot topic currently, who thinks that network states can exist with the current internet stack as it is centralized?
There's some maybes.
There is some maybes again. So exactly, I think, and I'm pretty sure everyone agrees other than this, but this is also an agreement that there cannot be any network state without decentralized internet infrastructure. And why is that? It goes without saying, but internet is currently centralized. So if we look at the internet stack, all layer of it is centralized and controlled by one or few organisms, organizations, governments, countries, and so on. Internet is unreliable as a result and dependent on hierarchy and controlled. It is as well outdated, right? So the internet, as we know it, the status quo, has been the case for many, many years, and it is quite naive, in my opinion, to think that this is not going to evolve and change as much as everything else is evolving and changing, and in our case, in the crypto scene, decentralizing, right? So internet currently is outdated, and we have to envision another form, an evolved form of internet. What will be the internet that we're going to have, the connectivity that we're going to experience 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and build towards that vision. Internet is as well fragmented like nation-state model. So no matter in which country you are, your connection to internet through your phone, through Wi-Fi, is an extension of the territory in which you are. So the control of your connectivity is done by the government or the controlling entity of where you are. And this as well, in my opinion, is outdated. My first encounter with internet shutdown happened in 2019, and this was when in Iran there were protests against the increase in fuel prices, and protests there get intense pretty quickly. And we were following, I wasn't in Iran at that time, but we were following very closely the news, seeing how protests are going, how they're evolving, how the repression of the protests are going, talking with family and friends, and then one day I wake up and no messages are going through. So naturally, I think WhatsApp is down. Then I think, oh, Signal is down too. Instagram, like everything is down. There may be a problem, and that's when I realized, and through NetBlocks, which shares and gathers this data on Twitter mainly, also on their website, and it's quite reliable, that there is a national outage, a total shutdown of connectivity in Iran. It was the first time it was happening, so internet is always controlled there. It's censored. There are a lot of things you cannot access without a VPN, but never before there was no access at all. And this access, we didn't know how long it was going to last, and it lasted a whole week, where we couldn't hear from our people, when we couldn't hear news on TV because there was no information going back and forth. It was extremely tough time. And once connectivity started growing again, first, it was never like before, and second, the momentum was gone. So no one talked about what happened. It was very little news coming out, very little pictures, videos coming out. And you can see in the previous slide, the picture, low resolution, because, I mean, high resolution videos are not really transiting through that connection. So, and a lot of people died, a lot of people were killed, a lot of people were arrested. We never had numbers that were reliable on what happened. So that's the result of a shutdown, is basically a lot of criminality, and this feel like street art picture from inside of Iran shows it well. So during this 1 week, they beta tested the national intranet network. So they have this intranet network in Iran that is based on the Chinese model, and during this week they saw whether or not life can continue without access to global internet, only through this intranet that is highly surveilled and controlled by the government. And this intranet is called the Cyberspace Protection Plan. And this tag says that it equals a guarantee of crime. Fast forward last year, 2022, September, October, November, a lot of protests again in Iran, and yet again, internet shutdown. But this time, shutdown wasn't as radical as before. It was during certain hour. It was only on mobile network. It was only in certain regions, so that banks or other infrastructure that had dependencies on global internet can continue functioning. So the toll on the economy is less, although it had a lot of toll on small and medium-sized businesses. But from that time onwards until today, and probably in the future, connectivity will never be like before in Iran. Resiliency is low tech, so people figured out other ways to kind of live their lives, right? So they had other communication channels, more immediate interactions, more physical interactions. They reduced their reliance on internet for a lot of things, changed their habit. Immediacy is not an expectation anymore, and they were prepared. So every phone in Iran has VPNs installed on it, and people know how to update the routes. And
I think you should pause there and like just acknowledge that everyone in like a society knows what a VPN is, and think about like how different our reality must be when we exist in like the Western world, and we know everyone in our lives, for the most part, 90% doesn't know what a VPN is. Like, that's very real.
Exactly. Like every single person, although they may not fully understand how it works, but even my grandmother has a VPN on her phone. So it comes as a default. And internet shutdown, I mean, this is a funny slide to me. I mean, it's kind of sad as well, but it's not a digital detox retreat. So it's not like, oh, it's shut down, so today I'm gonna rest. No, when internet is shut down, other things are as well. So satellite connections are jammed, so you cannot watch news on TV. Your phone connection don't go through. It's hard maybe to call with mobile. You need landline, so people are like put at home instead of like being in the streets. It disrupts all layers of your life. And nowadays that we're so used to communicating through internet, and especially sharing pictures and videos, this is extremely disruptive. This picture that you see on the left over there is a picture I took at the customs border in Iran, where you have to, when you enter Iran, register your mobile phone with customs. So they take it, they register it, and only when it's registered fully, you can use it with a SIM card in Iran. Otherwise, it's entirely blocked from the network. So they do that in order to be able to know which phone belongs to whom, and let you speculate on the underlying reason why they do that. But on this picture, it says that any iPhone 14 and beyond cannot be imported and used in Iran. And I was surprised because there was never a restriction beforehand on the model of the phone you can register. And I asked friends around who are not necessarily in tech, and they said, oh, because iPhone 14 can connect to Starlink. This is not the case yet, so we know that iPhone 14 has a possibility to connect to satellite connections for very specific purposes, but nonetheless, the thought or the rumor is that it may happen that a day that our mobile phones are acting as satellite internet nodes. And beforehand, obviously governments who want to control internet want to also get rid of these very mobile devices that may allow people to circumvent this national connection.
Can I pause us there for a second? Like, yeah, like I think just to make everyone know what that like alliance means. I think we've all been off the grid before in some remote area, and you've looked at the top corner of your phone and you've seen the SOS signal, a symbol on it, and that is let Apple spending $450 million so that if you're ever lost, since you bought an iPhone, if you're ever really lost and off the grid and away from cell tower reception, they could still track where you are. They could get your information to authorities. You could make a quick call and transmit low data over like I think it's 1.4 gigabyte bandhertz to gigahertz bandwidth to these satellite networks. So that's like the simplicity of the technology in your real life is like, that's what you're communicating.
And obviously, everyone would want that at some point to have these devices that can connect, right? But it also raises other questions that I'm not gonna get into right now, but if your phone can connect to a form of internet, then other powers may have data on you that some other powers don't want. A lot of shutdowns happen everywhere. So it's not only Iran. I gave the example of Iran because I'm familiar with it and it's a big one. But we can see already that from January this year until May, 21 countries shut down internet to control its population in illegitimate manners. So I gave the example of Iran. There's the example of Turkey after the earthquake. They, I think, censored Twitter because there was a lot of criticism of the government happening there. So any form of dissent is highly controlled. There's China, there's India, a very big repeat offender. And obviously shutdowns or drastic slowdowns have negative effects on the economy. That goes without saying, but also on human rights that often get violated without any form of accountability or ways to raise awareness to make it stop. Relationships are impaired. Access to knowledge is highly impaired. So imagine students or people that are needing this form of knowledge or anybody else, culture, health and moral, and health specifically in rural areas where they rely on WhatsApp, for instance, to talk to doctors or have doctors see their cases, are also suffering a lot. But we don't have to go very far to see internet shutdowns happening or the threat of shutdowns. And this is a picture from a protest in France a few days ago against police brutality and systemic racism. The protest got spread across France very suddenly and became violent. And as a result, Macron said that internet should be cut off. It was obviously very poorly received by the public that said that this is an authoritarian move. And its cabinet attempted to kind of mitigate the situation by saying that Macron didn't mean a total blackout. All he wanted or he wants is a targeted censorship or shutdown, for instance, Snapchat maps, in order to curb protesters' ability to organize gathering. And we are right now in France. Like, how is that better than a blackout? Like, how is that okay to censor like maps or Snapchat or like social media to prevent people from voicing their grievances against the government? Like, for me, it makes no sense. And if it happens here, or even if there are talks about it here, it doesn't even need to happen. But even if they think it's okay to mention it, we're definitely going towards a very dark direction, no matter if we're in the West, in a democratic country, or anywhere else. 2/3 of humanity uses the internet. But even within these 2/3, billions are not meaningfully connected. What are meaningful connections is consistent connection, safe connection, cheap, affordable connection. Anything else is not meaningful. And this is according to a report by the International Telecommunication Union, which is a United Nations body. And it says that if there is no meaningful connection, repeating here that economic development is stunted, but also it deepens inequalities and creates a surface for violence. And we're gonna illustrate that violence through the longest shutdown to date that is happening right now in Tigray.
Okay, so this is, thank you, Fatemeh. And thank you, ECC and Bettina and Jerome and everyone who's worked on the team. Thank you for letting us re-record this. It's actually quite nice to be able to talk about such heavy topics and have like the time needed to kind of get into the flow, because it is pretty intense and it is like a reality that many of us in, you know, privileged technical circles don't really experience, but we are lightly aware of. And we don't actually know what the full extent of the darkest version of an internet shutdown looks like. We theorize about what it looks like. And so we felt that it was important to take a lot of time to start putting forth real philosophies and real solutions and base it off of our real lived experience. And Fatemeh as well just spoke about theirs, and I am speaking about mine as a Tigrayan immigrant into America who is a part of these fractured internet networks, who is a part of communities that are shut off, that have my heart and that I care about, and then seeing them one day and not seeing them the next. And so at the very beginning of well, in November 2020, November 4th, there started to be some military actions taken by federal government of Ethiopia against a population of 7 million people in northern Ethiopia called the Tigrayans, the Tigray people, that is us. We've been fucking around that spot for about 4,000 years, not gonna lie. So we're very familiar with the geographical region, with how to defend our space and, you know, maintain democracy. It is a very, very proud democratic community. And so there was some authoritarian nonsense, as there always is during the pandemic. Long story short, there started to be ethnic targeting. There became a movement in the United States, in Europe, here as well, in Paris, there was some big stuff done to amplify this movement, and it started to get traction. Okay, look at that. That's a good picture. That's a great picture, in fact. That's the New York Times showing up in East Africa and taking a great fucking picture and putting it on the front page of their website. That is the last time the New York Times was able to actually get a good photo out of Tigray, because that picture started to get some support. That experience being transmitted through communication channels to the Western world, to democratic channels, started to get some support. It was evidence. It was a story, it was a narrative that was against the national dialogue, the state apparatus. And so we have what's happening in Tigray, an internet shutdown. They shut down the internet for over 800 days. It is the longest internet shutdown in the existence of the internet. It is the pinnacle evolution of siege warfare, which is exactly what they used, from a point of starvation all the way down to weaponized sexual violence. Every single crime they committed, every single woman that was violated, every single man that was violated, every single child that was violated, every murder that was carried out was hidden under a blackout of communication hierarchy. They blacked out the internet and said, we are going to kill 800,000 ethnic Tigrayans. We are going to sexually violate over 200,000 of them. And we are going to scorched earth tactic this entire 20,000 square foot or square mile territory, and no one is ever going to hear about it. And you know that no one is ever going to hear about it because they watch stuff like Syria, and they watch stuff that happened in Myanmar with the Rohingya people, and in other locations during like the Arab Spring, and they saw how the apathy of the West would allow them to maintain a 2-year-long internet shutdown. And the fact is, I'm saying numbers like 800,000 and 200,000, those are like generous, those are conservative estimates made by Western authorities. So these are people who are like, I'm sure not that many people died. And these aren't like soldiers died, these are like civilians. This is a population of 7 million that lost about 10% of its population in 2 years. And that is largely because you look at how, oh man, I don't know if you guys can even read that. The actual like information database of our world is comprised under hierarchical understanding of like global geopolitical movements. And so if you look and you type in the same 3-word or the same sentence, which is that's death, Ukraine war. I memorized all my shit, so I can tell you guys what's going on. Death, Ukraine war. Death, Tigray war. So what you're gonna have here is as of yesterday, an article 14 hours ago. You have an article 13, 1 day ago, 1 week ago, 1 week ago. A war that was orders of magnitude way bigger and an actual confirmed genocide that started 2 years ago has the most recent article 2 weeks ago because it's in relation to the total deaths of the world with Ukraine, and then the most recent all the way back in 2022 at the final like peace accord agreement, right? All of that is like existent of patterns where we know for a fact the world's deadliest war and the most victim civilian death and the actual violations happening on a human rights level is in a space that is locked down from the internet. And so the Western authorities know this is happening. There's a lot of diplomatic authorities, there's a lot of Eastern, like a lot of different financial authorities and people who involve themselves in markets that Ethiopia would be very, very unfortunate to exit from, like AGOA and various trade markets. Those authorities know there's the world's deadliest war and it's not happening in Ukraine. And they are benefiting in general, like we all are benefiting from sharing a reality where we don't realize there's multiple dimensions to existence and that the internet is directly responsible for the accountability in all of our lives. If any of you have ever been on Twitter and you've seen people get justice for some social aggravation, you've seen the power of like social media and the ability of social movements, but you've also seen the power of diplomatic authorities having concrete evidence and making sanctionable offenses and making a legal documentation around this. And so what we have now is 2 years later, Tigray is coming back online very slowly. And what we have is we're supposed to what? Wait for internet to solve our problem of communication? Now, if you look at over time, even at the beginning start of the Tigray war, the Ukraine war hadn't even started yet and still outperformed us in trends. Nobody had information. Nobody understood what was happening. So like nobody cared. And we can take like the real issue is like technocolonialism isn't like it isn't some like grand groom of lizard people that are like, we are just not gonna like pay attention to Africa. There are centuries old hierarchical structures around information and global progress from certain perspectives, from high leverage perspectives. And these formatted, already existent structures of hierarchy affect every single form of information resource that human beings in that hierarchy are suspect to. So at IDA, our mission, and this is where we start to get into quick wrap up, by the way, some actual solutions and where we see these things going, because I don't think it's actually, I have a lot of background in technical space. I have engineering background. I have a lot of just a little fooling around and trying to make some things happen background. And I'll tell you, the technological aspect is not the big issue. Like people have actually made real strides towards hardware that can be experimented upon and create real, what we are calling resiliency. And the resilient internet is not necessarily an instantly communicated internet. The resilient internet, and why we asked the question at the very beginning around, do you remember dial-up and that experience, is that a high latency communication channel that is indestructible is definitively more valuable than an instant or low latency channel that is easily destroyed. And that is the message, I think, that we from the like leapfrog nations of the world are trying to tell the West, is say like, we see what's happening in France. We see the like logical arguments towards freedom and safety. And she showed the cyberspace protection force. Like those same narratives have been pushed in Iran and in Tigray in Ethiopia to the rest of Ethiopia. And so what we say is like there needs to be a non-hierarchical structure behind this so that narratives don't fall under the same powers that are causing atrocities or the same powers that have something to hide. So it's pretty obvious if you go to anyone in the UN, they will give you the same line. They'll say 2020, 2030 must be about us connecting everyone. I've written it differently because I think it should be written differently. But they will tell you that it should be about connecting everyone on the planet. We are going to connect everybody. That's the important thing. But what does this connection bring? Does it bring meaning? Does it bring real, actual, like, meaningful human connection? Does it bring resiliency? No. It's going to be dependent on the existent hierarchical telecommunications structure that exists that is, you know, there's benefits. Capitalism is not like to blame necessarily. There's just the way these structures are certainly set up, and there's ways to fight back. The crypto community is one of those ways, actually. The crypto community is uniquely positioned to affect real change. It just requires the crypto community to realize that they need to reformat, we need to reformat our risk aversion. We've lived through the actual effects of an internet shutdown, and it immediately, I mean, we went through the same bull market the rest of you did the last like 2 years. And during that time, we also went through like very aggressive communication shutdowns and saw the holes in the cypherpunk movement. And I think what we want to say is reformat your risk aversion, because you guys, the crypto community, us as a whole, is very, very risk tolerant of economic Lego models and trying to make any sort of like economic engine work in order to create sustainability. And yet this is the first class of cypherpunks that has ever been this wealthy off of a collective idea that did not take that much time to really make money off of, that has been this risk adverse to hardware development and making inroads into hardware resiliency to support their cypherpunk thesis, to support these arguments of open markets and freedom of currency. Do you think Tigray had a banking industry when the internet and the power was shut off? They did not. So there is a desire and a unique and innate desire in the cypherpunk movement to make its way into hardware. And yet this class of cypherpunks that's made the most money of really any and made the most inroads to bringing more people into the cypherpunk movement has spent the least amount of money and the least amount of time and the least amount of genuine effort trying to make inroads into hardware development. And that is genuinely the biggest problem that we see. So you have to ask yourself when you're building these products, in which dimension do you reside? Do you reside in a dimension where you can use crypto products easily, where you can, shield your transactions and where you can create a DAO with your friends and all of that is going to be guaranteed tomorrow and you'll never have to worry about it? Or do you exist in a dimension where like you're trying to send your family money using crypto and then them motherfuckers took the internet down and that last resort way that you were sending your family money is now shut off? This is the resiliency that we have to describe to everyone and have to understand, is because once again, we are going to start realizing we have to make better markets for ourselves. We're all sharing the same users, and I think that we should all just be honest about that. We all made a big statement about how we were going to make our way into these developing nations and bank the unbanked and all of this stuff, and that doesn't actually happen on the current structure and hierarchy of the internet. That happens on an evolved form of the internet. And the evolved internet is a very easy thing to build. It's something that requires us to build it. It requires a concept of nomadology. It requires meeting these communities that are the next billion, the next like 1.5 billion, the next 750 million in sub-Saharan Africa, and saying, hey, you guys actually exist off a policy of nomadology. Colonialism is seen through maps. We see how borders have affected your actual free flowing of information and culture. The fact that we've built the internet to abide by those same map borderlines and abide by those same structures is actually bad for you, and we will never get you as users, and we will never create this next like billion users online without already bowing down to the structures of hierarchy that don't want you online. So what the fuck are we doing having any kind of conference that talks about reaching these people? What are we doing in 2017 raising billions of dollars for this industry off of this narrative when we clearly don't abide by the actual philosophy that is structuring these societies and the way they interact with technology? And so here's where is a piece from our unpublished and privately circulated like manifesto doc. It's 1 page long. It'll be public in the near future. But realistically, we think the way that we're visualizing the internet and the structure of cypherpunk movement is wrong. And the internet is not a garden of forking paths. Gardens have boundaries and have agendas. Agendas usually made by kings. And it is not a central memory core of progress. Progress is subjective, as you've seen. The evolved internet is what it must be, and that is a new form of cockroach. And the idea of the cockroach is one that is resilient in imagery against humanity's greatest aggressions. And as privileged designers of communication infrastructure, we have agency to decide if we build for hierarchy or we build for unfettered evolution, and we have to recognize that unfettered evolution has actually never existed. Information, as it's been used by us to create giant civilizations and huge amounts of weaponry for our various siloed purposes, is completely given to us in a hierarchical manner. The access to information has been the biggest thing that created the domination of the planet, domination of different continents. It was those who had access to maps. If you had access to sea charts and maps, you were willing to spend huge portions of your treasury on that information because it gave you power. And so the roach internet is really, I think you have to do this thing, right? Yeah, nice. The roach internet, this is like the last of it, is us going inside the internet as a metaphorical concept, sure, but as a physical concept, we are these roaches living inside. We are privileged technical designers. We're building stuff. A lot of these Web3 foundations, not the Web3 foundation, but many of the Web3 foundations have worked with the UN. They've worked with the IMF. I myself have been in conversations with technical designers from the IMF when I was working previously at Cello, and I know how much these people know, and I know how much we know, and I know that in reality, the way that we move forward and create situations where like there is like this resilient future for people in Iran, for people in Tigray, for people in Sudan, is by making capitalist arguments, by saying, you know what, if you help this type of development, you actually create greater resiliency for your capital markets. You create the ability to levy sanctions against people who shut down information networks. You create the ability to open up telecommunications diversity. And then when telecommunications diversity happens, we have more options like iPhone 14s to Globalstar to send very important messages in times of resiliency. And that is why we would like to invite you all to come talk to us later, reach out to us. Our ENS is roachinternet.eth. Don't try and take anything from us. We are here to stay. Bye.